Last month we did chapter 2 of the book of Daniel, and chapter 2 is a very long chapter, and it's a very important chapter because it helps us when we get to chapter 7 and chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 11, places like this. So I'd like to review that because I think it's important that we understand what is going on there, and then we're going to do another little chapter, which is I call it the fireproof Jewish men, right? And so why study the book of Daniel? Daniel was born more than 2,630 or 40 years ago. That's a long while ago, isn't it? Even for old people like me, that's a long ways. But Daniel gives us some of God's plans for the future. You ever want to know what's going on? What's going to happen? Is China going to invade Taiwan? Is Russia going to win Ukraine? The Bible doesn't give us a lot of those kind of things, but it does tell us about the final problems, how the issues will be resolved in the end. And that's really what Daniel and the book of Revelation are about. And by the way, God has plans. In the book of Jeremiah, God spoke to Jeremiah one time and he said, "What do you see?" He gave him a vision. He said, "What do you see?" "I see an almond branch." And then he said, and the word almond in Hebrew it got the same root as the word to do. I'm going to do it. And he says, that almond branch, I'm doing it. I'm doing my word to accomplish it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to bring about my predictions of the prophets, right? So you might think, well, there's a lot of things that happen are not just. There's a lot of bad things that happen. Don't worry about that. God is always just. He can use the wicked to undo their own system so that he will eventually triumph. So many Christians long for God to speak to them. You ever heard somebody, "Oh Lord, speak to me, show me what I should do, give me a vision," something like that. But chapter 2 of Daniel, there's a pagan king who gets a vision. And this pagan king is not just any old pagan king. He's a mean dude, He runs around killing people. He's a horrible guy, and yet God gives him a vision. You say, well, why would God give him a vision? Because he was part of the vision. He's part of the future. He's how God is going to predict what's going to happen in the future. And of course, he wouldn't have known it. And it authenticates Daniel, because Daniel comes in, God gives Daniel the ability to tell what the vision is about, right? By the way, this is a picture of Nebuchadnezzar that's carved in a stone. And somebody has highlighted it because the stone is kind of dark and you can't see all the details. But he rebuilt the ziggurat. The ziggurat is, the middle of the ziggurat was just piled up mud or clay. The outside of it was clay bricks. And then on the outside of that, usually they were fired bricks. So the outside, it was like a big pyramid, like a dome, but it was, they had to have drainage systems in there because the rain could make the thing melt and fall away. It was kind of a weird thing. But he says, I rebuilt it. And on the top of that thing, there was a guy named Herodotus who went to Babylon a couple 100 years later, 150 years later or something. And he said up on top, there was a golden image of a man. So today we're going to run into a golden image of a man. So here, remember, let's review a little bit. Daniel was a Jewish young man, lived in Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar came along and captured the city when he was a young man, took him hostage. You know what a hostage is, right? Hostage, we're going to take you to our country. You're going to do what we say, but he put him in prison, not in prison. He put him in school. And the school was, you got to learn our language, you got to learn our religious traditions, you got to learn our astronomy, you got to learn all this stuff. And the interesting thing about Daniel is Daniel and his three friends said, we will not compromise. We're not going to play this game. Not only are we not going to worship their gods, but we're not going to eat their food that is the food that is, Jews weren't supposed to eat certain pork or something. He said, I'm not going to do that. So he refused to compromise. God gave him wisdom. So then remember the story last month. Nebuchadnezzar had this strange vision. And And in their system, in their world, if a king had a dream, it was really a big deal. You can find that elsewhere in the Bible, like Pharaoh had a dream. Remember that? And so it's a big deal because maybe the gods are telling me something. And so he was really worried about this thing, and because it could mean something bad's going to happen or something's good's going to happen. And how do we know this? This is a very interesting. If you're interested in reading ancient literature, there's a story called The Curse of Agade, and it's a clay tablet. There's several clay tablets have been found, and there are different versions of it. They're not all exactly the same. But basically what it says, this king, and by the way, it's partially myth and partially true. We know that Naram-Sin did live, and he did live in the city. We know that the city was destroyed, but some of the things that are in the story are made to make the gods great, and not, so it's partly myth. So, but this is what Nebuchadnezzar read about. This is his belief, right? So the king has a dream. He didn't tell anybody. He humbled himself for 7 years. He humbled himself. He put a reed mat over his royal barge. He went on the canals on. He wore humble clothing. He didn't wear his crown. He did all this stuff trying to appease the gods. But the omens remained negative. He kept giving sacrifices, and the omens were negative. The gods weren't answering him. He wasn't appeasing them. His system was the gods could stop something bad from happening by humbling himself, right? And so then he went to Endel-Ziggurat. He tore it down. He stole all the gold. Then the gods brought about the trouble. And the trouble was the river shriveled, the crops failed, the mountain tribes came down and surrounded his city and put it under siege. The people starved. They ate their leather door hinges. Have you ever eaten a leather door hinge? The ancient people, the door hinges were made out of leather. Can you imagine that? You boil the leather and chew on it because they were starving. Finally, the city was destroyed. The wild animals came in and moved into the ruined houses, and the city was abandoned. The grass overgrew the topaz. Remember, in that world, you towed boats along these canals. That's how they moved stuff. And the canals clogged with sediments. And then finally, the city was gone. And the interesting thing about this city is it's mentioned in the Bible, by the way. The name of the city is mentioned in Genesis chapter 11. We know approximately where it is because we have records from ancient people that said it was right on the intersection of these two little rivers. One river comes down from the mountains on the border of Iran. But when you go there today, there's nothing there. Right? Maybe the river changed course. The city of Agade, or the city, the northern people called it Akkad, it's gone. It's completely gone. It's obliterated. It's gone. So part of the dream that Nebuchadnezzar's worried about is, hey, maybe my city will be gone. You understand what he's doing? So what does Nebuchadnezzar do? He gives orders to the magicians, and he said, come, I have a dream. Tell me my dream. And also, let me know what it means. And so then these guys come in there, and they speak to the king. By the way, from here on, the book starts changing from Hebrew to Aramaic, the language, and in the original. And they say, oh, king, tell us your dream, and we'll tell you what it means. Well, the king was, check out this guy. He says, the command for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. You think this is a nice guy? This is a mean dude, isn't he? If you don't tell me what I dreamed and also tell me what it means. And you say, well, this guy is crazy. What's he doing that for? Well, he's thinking this dream, I got to know. This is an important thing. This is part of his religion. I got to understand it. So otherwise, the thing about the dream, the kings in the ancient times, they weren't there. If you say, what's the government for? The government's to make sure the roads are taken care of, or, take care of people, help, fix things. The main problem, the kings in those days, was to keep the gods at bay. keep them happy. Don't let the gods mess with us. That's what the king's job was, right? That's how they believed. They were pagans. This is a pagan guy gets a dream that God gave him. Think about it. Isn't that weird? And so he said, if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, I'll give you lots of rewards. You'll be a rich man. We'll make you an important person. But of course, they argued back and they said, hey, nobody can do that. Nobody can tell you what you dream. And he says, then you're all going to die. Because if you can't tell me your dream, you're all telling me that you work for the gods, you have communication with the gods, all this stuff. You know what the gods are doing. Then come on, let me know what the gods are doing, right? And so what happens? By the way, the king had formerly, we have some tablets that we found back there. These guys, some of these tablets, they found thousands of tablets. The nice thing, if you go to the Philippines, maybe you say, Filipinos had writing, right? Before the Spanish got there. But you don't find very much of the writing because, if you write on bamboo or something, it rots away. And if you write on paper, if you don't store it in a dry place, it doesn't, But they wrote on clay, and clay has this wonderful ability that it can last for a long while. Sometimes it breaks or cracks. So we know a lot about what those guys said. He used to be a priest of Mercury. Mercury, Nebo was the god of Mercury, what we call Mercury, right? And so he knew a lot about what these guys were doing. They played games, right? They would say, hey, if you do the right sacrifices, we'll keep the gods from making it happen. But if it happened anyway, they said, well, you didn't make the right sacrifice. You didn't honor us right. And that's why it happened. So they had both sides covered, when they made a prediction. And so remember what happened. Daniel went to his house, his three friends. He lived in a house. By the way, the end of chapter 2 happens after chapter 3. Daniel and his friends were still in school. The school lasted 3 years, and this dream he had was in the second year of the king. So you understand, in ancient times, they didn't necessarily write stories chronologically, right? One after the other. So you have to. So he went to his friends and he said, let's pray that God would reveal the mystery to us, because otherwise we're going to die too, right? They had been captured. The king had ordered, even though they hadn't graduated from school yet, they were still learning to be wise men. And the king said, kill all the wise men, right? So, and then the mystery was revealed to Daniel. And Daniel made some really great statements. He's, let the name of God be blessed from eon to eon, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who has revealed the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. He knows when God gives him the answer that this is an important thing. I'm going to be able to go to the king, and the king's going to know I'm telling him this vision that he had. And it's going to give me ability. It's going to give me power before the king. And it's God's doing, see. Even now you have made known to me what is requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. So the king's matter was, the king had this dream. And here's the dream. The dream, if you were to build an image, and you said, well, let's carve this image, maybe you start with the feet, right? And say, well, we need to stand up, and then we'll carve the top, and finally maybe we'll finish it. But no, this image, it starts with the head and it ends with the feet, right? But it's an image that has sequence to it. It's kingdoms. One kingdom follows the another. And think about gold. Gold is something, by the way, the head is gold. The head is Nebuchadnezzar himself. It's not just his kingdom. He's the king, right? He says, you are the king. You are the head of gold. Gold doesn't tarnish, right? Gold laying in the ocean for hundreds of years, and it's still nice and shiny, right? Silver tarnishes, right? But you rub it a little bit and it gets shiny again. Brass can, under certain circumstances, it'll get all green and corroded, and it doesn't rust. But iron, even though it's very strong, it'll rust to nothing, right? You put iron outside and it'll rust away, right? So it's a deteriorating sequence here. It starts with gold and ends with, and then it ends with the feet and the toes of iron and mixed with clay. Now that's really corrupt because the iron doesn't stick to the clay. So what does it mean? So Daniel explains this to him, this extraordinarily large, great, splendid image, and its appearance was awesome. And the head of that statue was fine gold and so forth. And the belly and the thighs were bronze. The breast and arms were silver. And the iron and the legs were of iron. And the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay. And the thing about iron and clay is they don't stick together. So this is a sequence of kingdoms. You say, well, what's the big deal? There were kingdoms all over the world. The Chinese had kingdoms that lasted for thousands of years, right? Their different countries had their own rules. Why are these guys here? Why are they so important? Well, he says that the Lord is going to set up a kingdom. And the Lord is going to crush this image. What's the image represent? These kingdoms, right? It's a story about he's using pictures to illustrate what's going to happen. And this rock stone, which is cut out with a hand, strikes the statue on the feet of iron and clay. It crushes them, and then it pulverizes the iron, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, and they're all pulverized as one. Ask you a question. Can you change the past? Can you make the past go away? I think you can. If you forget the past, boom, it's gone, right? Think about it. What's he doing? All of this thing is crushed in one point, right? What's he doing? He's talking about a sequence of kingdoms that will build one on another. Then Christ is going to come. The whole statue is destroyed at once. And what happens? Jesus sets up a kingdom that will never give up, right? You understand what's happening? The whole system. So why is the system one image? Well, I'd like to suggest to you that there's a method to it. Babylon is an important part of our heritage. You say, we're not pagans. We don't worship Marduk or anything like that. We don't have omens or whatever. But there would be no science without Babylon. Because Babylon invented precision ways of measuring things you can't hold in your hand. Right? They had angles that were really precise and very important. Their mathematical ways eventually was taken on by the Greeks and became part of the heritage of what is today called science. Persia, you say, what do we got to do with Persia? Persia developed the first nation that had money. You use money? Does the government say pay your taxes in money? Persians were the first people to say pay your taxes in money. Everybody else said pay it in barley or something, right? So this is, and they built a system that was multicultural. You ever heard of multiculturalism? Persia developed that. Cyrus the Great was the first multiculturalist in the world. The first politician, if you want. His clay tablet that is in the United Nations building in New York, a copy of it. He's considered to be part of our world heritage, right? Greece, everybody knows what Greece did, right? Greece, they developed, science, art, history, poetry, all kinds of good things. Do we still imitate Greece? We use their alphabet in scientific literature. It's all over the place, right? What about Rome? Rome developed a system of three-part governments. Rome invented lawyers. Ever heard of a lawyer? Right? How many lawyers are there, right? What about today? Where are we today? Are we in the place where there's no unity? If there's one word you could say that would characterize the world you and I live in, could we use the word disunity? Division? When the politicians win elections, they don't win it by much, do they? They say, man, we won real big. We won by 50.2% or something, right? It's divided, isn't it? So this is the world that we live in. You say, well, Christians built let's get one word to kind of characterize this image I'd like to use the word civilization, the Western civilization. Where did it came from? It was built on the foundations of these four empires, right? Uh, Let me give you, and so again, I told you about that. You ever seen this picture? These are the founders of the American government, the Constitution, right? These guys who wore long hose and high-heeled shoes and lots of frill at their neck and wore powdered wigs or something, right? And, what did they do? They did something really interesting. They studied. They just had a big war with the king, and they didn't like kings. Because the kings of England, they weren't happy with the King of England, King George III. They weren't happy with him at all. And so we don't want a king. So what kind of government would she make? Well, they studied three different kinds of governments. We know that because they wrote things down, right? And they studied Athens. Said, wow, Athens had culture. They had, they had art. They had music. They had science. They had all these things. We really like to have that characteristic of our country. But he says, you know what? They were always fighting each other. Each Greek city-state was always fighting. The democracies went one way, and then they went another. There was always a turmoil. And then they went to Sparta, and they said, Sparta is really great. Man, they're powerful, they're strong. And they have these 30 men that run the country, and they were rich and powerful. And they could beat any army, but their money was made of iron. Wow, they didn't believe in riches, they didn't believe in poetry, they didn't do any of that stuff. And they said, well, they're kind of nice, but we don't want to build a country like that. And then they looked at Rome. And they said, you know what? The Romans put all three of these different type of governments together. They had the oligarchs, and they had the democracy, and they had the power of a king, and yet they did it in such a way that no one person could grab all the power. And guess what? We built the first country in the world that was modeled after Rome. Is that interesting to you? The Europeans had played with the Romans for a while. They used them to try to fight the kings and stuff like that, but they never did what the Americans did. Now, everywhere you go in the world, you go to North Korea, and they called themselves the People's Republic. Republic is a Roman word. Res publica means the people's thing in Latin, right? Why do they call themselves a republic? They imitate the Roman government, but if you don't vote for Kim Jong-un, what do you think is going to happen to you? Right? So what I'd like to say to you is that four-nation sequence, Christians built on it. Medieval Christians, but it isn't Christian. The foundations of it were not Christian. Okay? That may not make you feel good, but let's take that. And by the way, if you go to the American Parliament and you go to the Congress, what do you think those gold things are on the side of the podium? They're the symbol of authority in ancient Rome. If you were a consul in Rome, you got 12 of these guys to walk around with their bundle of sticks and an axe head sticking out. And it meant, I have the authority to chop off your head, and I can beat you with these sticks if you violate my authority. But my authority is not total. My authority, I have another consul who can oppose me. He can veto me. And we all work together. And there was some kind of a system trying to make nobody have all power, right? Interesting, isn't it? Okay, that's enough. That's our review. I'd like to say to you, think about it. The Bible doesn't tell us what's going to happen in the war between Ukraine and Russia. But it does tell us about a certain point in history where there will be wars, and there will be rumors of wars. And in the end, this is called the tribulation. At the end of that time, Jesus is coming. And do you know what? Do you think the politicians are going to fix the pollution problems? You think they're going to fix the problems of economies where a lot of people are poor and all this stuff? You think that the religions are going to fix the world? No, Jesus is coming to fix the world. You understand, Jesus is going to set up a kingdom, and it's not going to be anything like the world we live in today. I predict nobody will have cell phones, but I could be wrong. But all right. So here's this King Nebuchadnezzar. He goes to this plain outside the city, and he sets up this golden image. By the way, a golden image doesn't mean that it was made out of pure gold. It was maybe had a clay interior, and they pounded some. You can take gold and you can hammer it as thin as aluminum foil, right? And you could glue it on the outside so it looked gold, but it probably wasn't solid gold. And by the way, the dimensions of the image are bad. You were about maybe, let's say, 4 times as high as you are wide, right? You're maybe 18 inches wide at the shoulders, and maybe you're 6 feet high or something like that. This image is way out of, he's 10 times as high as he's loud. So probably the image of a man was built on a pedestal. So they're counting the pedestal too, right? So he built this image, and this is what he did. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, and the magistrates, and all the rulers of the province were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. I wonder if he made the image because, this apparently was after the previous chapter, that he got the big head. He said, I'm the head of gold, let's make an image. Maybe, we don't know what the image represented. We do know that Herodotus went to Babylon years later, and he said on top of the ziggurat in Babylon, there was a golden image of a man. And that supposedly represented Marduk, which we would call the planet Jupiter, right? And so Nebuchadnezzar the king had set it up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the herald loudly proclaimed. By the way, if you lived in ancient times, you didn't have amplifiers, right? So if you wanted to say something to people, you had to shout really loudly if it was a large group. So notice the herald is shouting loudly, right? There were records in ancient times of a synagogue in Egyptian place. And the synagogue was so big that the guy on the front who was reading the Bible, the Old Testament, he'd have to have somebody halfway down to repeat it so that the guys on the back could hear it. So he's shouting. To you, the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the tigran, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of burning fire. Notice that this king he carries a big stick, doesn't he? If you don't do what I say, we're going to tear your house down. We're going to impale you. We're going to tear you limb from limb, whatever. Right? And therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the flute, the horn, the flute, the lyre, the tigran, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. For this reason, at that time, now notice, everybody's bowing down, except somebody noticed there were some people that didn't bow down, right? And for this reason, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward. Chaldeans, by the way, were relatives of Abraham. They were not the initial, the original inhabitants of the land of what we call Iraq now. And they came forward and brought forward charges against the Jews, and they responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever, which really, they didn't think he was going to live forever. They thought he's going to live for an eon, is what it really says. You, O king, have made a decree that every man, and he repeats the whole thing over and over, you're supposed to bow down, but they didn't. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a furnace of burning fire. By the way, ancient people, if you watch somebody, maybe one hand on an organ on a piano is playing one melody and another one's playing the other melody, and they all harmonize, right? You have people singing different parts. Ancient people didn't do that. They didn't have metronomes. They didn't have the system to synchronize music. So music, you all played the same note. So it was just louder. It wasn't different kinds of harmony. And so So then there are certain Jews, they said, whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon. So we know this happened after chapter 2 of Daniel, right? Namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He's using their Babylonian names. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods. They worship the golden image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar enraged. You think it would be a good idea to get Nebuchadnezzar into a rage? I don't think it would be good at all, because he certainly likes to throw his weight around. And he said, gave orders, bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? Now, this is a really interesting part. Listen to these guys. They didn't kowtow one bit to him. They didn't say, well, please, please forgive us. We're Jews. We're not allowed to do this. They came right out and boldly said, and so he gives them the same thing again, says, please worship my God. But if you do not worship, he says, you will immediately be cast into the furnace of the fire, blazing fire. And now listen what he says. What God is there who can deliver you out of my hand? Well, that's a challenge, isn't it? That's a challenge. No God can deliver you. If I throw you in the fire, you're going to burn. So this is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied. They said, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. Wow, we don't need to argue about this thing. He says, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of burning fire. Wow, is that a pretty interesting statement, right? They've got a little faith, don't they? And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we're not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Boy, are these guys bold, right? They stood up to this guy who tears you limb from limb and makes your house into a dung heap, I mean, they stood right up to him and said, nope, sorry, but we are not going to worship your gods. So what does Nebuchadnezzar do? He falls into a rage, right? That's what he does always, right? Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath. His facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. By the way, if you were standing before a king, you watched his face. If his face was smiling and he was happy at you, then you're saying, okay, I must be saying the right words. But his face all of a sudden started frowning and stuff. And if he had the power to tear you limb from limb and make your house into a dung heap, you watch his face, right? And his face changes. He's altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it usually was heated. And he commanded certain valiant warriors to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of fire. And so this is what they're going to do. And these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and other clothes, and were cast into the furnace of burning fire. So here they are. Before they throw them in, just to make sure you don't make a run for it, when we throw you in, we're going to tie you up. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So what does it mean, carry them up? Well, I don't know. It doesn't describe the furnace of burning fire. But my feeling is that they knew how to make bricks in Nebuchadnezzar. In Babylon, there were no stones. If you went around looking for a rock, you very rarely found rocks because there was mud everywhere and clay everywhere, and everything was made of clay. If you needed rocks, you went up to the mountains. You didn't get them down there by the valley. So everything, they made clay pots, they made clay writing tablets, everything was clay, right? And so I would suggest to you that maybe it was a kiln. And the kiln is kind of like these things. You can stack pottery in there. Some of them are very big. And you usually have one small hole at the top to let a little bit of the flame out, but you throttle the fire, right? You don't get too much oxygen in there because you don't want to burn those pots too fast. You want them to gradually warm up, and you turn a clay pot into a hard substance, right? And so some of these things can be very big. Here's a guy on a ladder stacking pots in a big kiln, right? I imagine that what they had to do was put a ladder and climb up the outside of the ladder and go to the chimney at the top and drop them in, because it says they carried them up, and when they carried them up, they had enough flame coming out the chimney out there that the other guys got burned, and eventually they died from their burns, right? So, but these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. So they're tied up, they go into the flames. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and stood up in haste. And he said to his highest officials, was it not three men that we cast into the midst of the fire? Now, it doesn't say that the other men saw the vision that Nebuchadnezzar did, but he says he saw it, right? And they replied to the king, certainly, O king. He said, look, he said, I see four men loosed and walking in the midst of the fire without harm. Whoa. Remember, he just recently said, which God can deliver you out of my hand? Right? This is a mean dude, and he's come to a sudden realization that he there's somebody who's bigger than him, right? And the appearance of the fourth is like the son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace, and he called out, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the most God, high God, and come here. So he likes to give commands, right? So he goes there and he says, I'm ordering you, come on out of there. What a statement. They're in the fire, and he says, walk on out of there. So they walk out. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. Wow, interesting, isn't it? Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's high officials gathered around and saw that in regard to these men, that the fire had no effect on their bodies of these men. So they weren't burned. Nor was the hair of their hair singed. You ever singe your hair? It's pretty easy to singe, isn't it? You know, and not only that, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. Wow, they somehow were in a cocoon in there that the Lord put around them that protected them, and they were not harmed at all. I don't know how he did it, but they didn't get burned. And Nebuchadnezzar, now here's how Nebuchadnezzar always, he ever noticed that sometimes politicians get big heads and they make big pronouncements like they run everything and we're important, and they always have to make some statement about something or other. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, when he sees this right away, he has to make a statement. Right? And he said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel, who delivered his servants, who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to worship any god except their own God. Now, that part's good, right? Bless this God. By the way, he didn't stop being a pagan, did he? Do you think there were people who saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead who didn't believe it? They didn't believe that he was the Messiah because they said they went to the high priest and said, we got to get rid of this guy. Right? So, I mean, seeing a miracle is not necessarily a means to faith, because a lot of people can excuse the miracle. There's many ways to do that. Therefore, I make a decree. Now, here he is. He's going to make his decree that any people or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and his house shall be reduced to a rubbish heap. This is his famous little saying that he likes to put out, isn't it? Quite interesting. Inasmuch as there is no God who is able to deliver in this way. Now, he recognizes that this is a really important evidence that there is a God. But he doesn't turn around and say, well, I'm going to take all my gods and chuck them in the fire. Right? He doesn't say that. He doesn't say to all the priests, you guys are all fired. You know, I don't need you anymore because I'm going to worship the only God who's able to deliver his servants out of the fire. He doesn't. He's still part of the political system, the religious system of his day, which integrated all this stuff into one system, right? And then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. Did the miracle cause the king to immediately come to faith? No. Did he recognize something important? I think he did. But and he did make a nice pronouncement. Do you think if we had a law today that says anybody that says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego should be torn limb from limb, how many people would be walking around with their limbs today? We'd be in trouble, wouldn't we? Because a lot of people curse God every day, don't they? So why did God protect these three Jewish men? Well, I'd like to submit to you that they had made a decision earlier in their life. We will not compromise. We will not compromise. We're going to be separate. We're part of the system. We have to learn all this pagan stuff. We have to learn all this stuff. We have to take tests on it, but we're not going to believe it, and we're not going to worship their gods. And there were other Jews who were there who compromised. But these men did not compromise. And by the way, where was Daniel? We don't know where Daniel was. There are some places later on in the Bible that Daniel is sent to the Elamite kingdoms as sort of maybe an ambassador or something. He might have been on he was an important person by this time, and he may have been somewhere else. Do you think these guys, these Jewish boys, do you think they prayed for this pagan king? I think they did, because later on, in the next chapter, we find that Nebuchadnezzar finally comes to a position of faith. Maybe not the kind of faith you have that Jesus died for my sins, but he comes to understand that there's only one God, right? I would submit to you that these fellows were praying for this guy. They cared about him. Even though he ran around tearing people limb from limb and all this stuff all the time, they served him and they cared about him, and they witnessed about their God to him. And I would submit they prayed to God about him. Do you live in such a way as to meet the world system halfway? Is it easy to be isolated? If you decide today that I am never again going to use any plastic because plastic is bad for the environment, do you think you could do it? I don't think you could do it. Right? If you say, I'm never going to pollute anywhere, I'm going to be totally, and I mean, it's wonderful that we try to do the best we can to preserve nature and stuff, but are we going to, can we get in a position where we can be different that much? Probably not. But in regards to our God and our faith in our God, we can be different. We can be separate. We can say, look, we serve the living God, and he's got a plan. He's coming. He's going to fix this world. By the way, politicians aren't going to fix the world, right? The technologists aren't going to fix the world. The scientists, the economists aren't going to fix the world. You know who's going to fix the world? Jesus Christ, right? And he's coming. And that's the story of Daniel in Revelation. He's coming. He's going to fix it. When is he going to come? We don't know all the details, but we see the signs. One of the signs is the world is divided. And there's a lot of evil going on, right? And when it gets bad enough, he's going to come. He's going to fix it. Do you pray for people around you who might have the kind of faith that gives one boldness? Here's a verse in the Bible. How did you get to have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Was it because you asked Jesus to come into your heart? I submit to you, lots of people asked Jesus to come into their heart, and they thought they were doing God a favor, and they weren't saved, right? Was it because you tried hard? Because you put money in the purse? Did you promised to do better? You repented and you asked God to forgive you? All of those things are wonderful things. What's the basis of your salvation? The basis of salvation is he did it all. He died for me. I believe him. It's about what he did, not what I did. You understand? We've been saved through faith. What does faith mean? I believe him. I believe his word. It is the gift of God. We didn't do it ourselves. It wasn't even how smart we were. The smarter you get doesn't mean the better, easier it is to come to faith. The gift of God is not a result of works. It's not of what I do. It's not. We can't boast. If you have trusted Jesus as your Savior, you are You are his workmanship. He brought you to trust him, and he will not give up on you. Isn't that wonderful to know? Okay, next month, we're going to, this is a picture written by a British artist called William Blake. You ever heard of him, Gene? Right. And this is supposedly Nebuchadnezzar when he had long fingernails and his hair was as long as an eagle's feathers and so forth. Next month, hopefully, the Lord doesn't come between now and then. We're going to talk about another chapter about Nebuchadnezzar and what happened to him. These boys didn't give up on Nebuchadnezzar, right? All right?